Hello, ladies. This is Dr. Melissa Rich with the podcast, Taking Care of Your Temple. We are in episode 30. Hard to believe. It is really going past. And we are talking today about communication, effective communication part 2, because I did an effective communication part 1 several weeks ago. And I'm divvying it up because honestly, I could talk about communication every single podcast. You would get tired of it. I'm really big on communication and doing it well. And it really, if we don't do it correctly, it really can affect us and other people adversely, which is why I'm focusing on it. So the objective of this podcast is what I'm trying to do every week is to help women connect with God regularly, to use his grace, power, strength, might, wisdom, all the things to improve the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Did I say all of them? I think I said, there should be 4. I think I said them all. Health. We do this by using the following principles. The first one is to remind us to keep our focus on God. And I always say, this sounds so basic, right? This is something that, of course, we're going to do. We're going to just keep focusing on God. We get so distracted. Honestly, sometimes I think I have the attention span of a rabbit. I'm just hopping all over the place. And I have to keep pulling myself back. And so don't get discouraged if that happens to you, because it happens to all of us. Just keep pulling yourself back on track, back on track, back on track. Keep looking at God, block out the distractions, keep moving forward. Next is to acknowledge that we are not enough on our own. We are not smart enough, strong enough, capable enough, cute enough, sweet enough, whatever enough to get through on our own. We need help, and we need God's help. The really amazing, wonderful thing is that God is very happy to provide that help for us if we ask him for it. So I ask a lot. Next is to remind ourselves often it's about progress, not perfection. Because really, if we are having to be perfect, we're doomed right from the beginning, because that's just not going to happen. It's not going to fly. We are not going to be perfect. I am not perfect, although I come close. No, just kidding. You are not going to be perfect either. None of us are. There was only one perfect person in this world. He is gone, but he is still available to help us, thank goodness. Then the fourth one is to work on consistently changing our thoughts. And boy, I say this because our thoughts can totally mess us up. If you are giving yourself on a regular basis negative, toxic messages that make you feel bad, that beat you up, that defeat you, you've got to stop. That is just not helping at all. You've got to learn how to change your thoughts. And there is so much research going on this. This is not just me saying it. Okay, the verse for this podcast that I found some time ago is 1 Corinthians 3:16. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? I think a lot of times we forget that we are God's temple, not just us by ourselves. We are the body of Christ. The body of Christ is God's temple, and we are part of that. And so we need to act that way. I mean, so often we don't, because we forget that he cares about us. He's there. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to be successful. And we just tend to forget that. All right. My goal is to do these podcasts weekly. So far, so good. And to give you guys some really good tools and tips that will help you feel, function, live, and act better. Sometimes on the podcast, I will have guests. I had my brother on last week. Other times it will be just me. Today, it is just me, you lucky people. So let me start us off, as I always do, with a quick prayer. Lord, I want to thank you for giving me this platform. I just thank you for the people who are listening. I ask your blessings on them. I ask that the things that I say will be helpful, that they will be well received. Since this is a podcast on communication, I pray that I will do a good job of communicating what I'm trying to get across. Thank you, Lord, so much for loving us and for making us part of your family. Amen. Okay, so it's interesting that I'm doing this on communication because, like I said, so often communication is not done well and it creates issues. Last night, I was at my church at it's summer, and on Wednesday nights, they do a mission thing where they have people from various and different mission organizations come and speak. And last night, the speaker was a man who had lived in Iran. He was an Iranian citizen. He and his family now lived in the United States because they had to leave Iran. And they were Christians, and they would have been thrown in prison or possibly executed. So he spoke about, what's going on a lot more than I realized in the church in Iran. And it was very interesting. The problem was, although he was very fluent in English, he's lived in this country for several years, he had a very heavy accent. So I got maybe a half to 2/3 of it. Now, I want to point out, he didn't do anything wrong. He is much more fluent in English than I would be in Iranian. I think it's actually Persian. He did much better. But I just want to point that out, is how when there are obstacles to communication, it makes issues. I know I missed some important things because I just couldn't understand what he was saying. So that really illustrates, I think, what I am trying to talk about. So I am drawing again from the book that I wrote, A Year of Building Success Through Clear, Concise, Cooperative Communication. I figure I wrote it. I might as well use it. So I want to start off with the fact that using the proper words is essential. The choose your words. Yeah, we need to choose our words correctly. And if any of y'all ever saw The Princess Bride, there is a line in there where this one guy keeps saying, inconceivable, inconceivable. And finally, at one point, one of the main characters looks at him and he goes, you keep using that word, but I do not think but I do not think it means what you think it means. And this happens a lot. We don't use our words properly. So when you're going to be using a word, a phrase, an idiom, make sure you know what it means and that you are using it correctly. Otherwise, you can end up looking pretty silly. If you are not sure what it means, don't use it. And if you're speaking in a meeting or before, especially at work or something like that related, make sure that you are pronouncing all your words correctly. Now, this is something that really is pretty simple to do, much more than it used to be. And the example I give on this is that for years, I avoided using the word quintessential because I didn't know how to pronounce it. I finally just Googled quintessential pronunciation, and there was a little recording, and it just repeated it and repeated it. I played it several times. I repeated the word, and then I got it. And so now I can use that word because I know how to say it. If you're wondering what it means, it represents the most perfect or typical example of a quality or class. So an example of how to use that properly would be Heidi Klum is the quintessential runway model, tall, thin, and gorgeous. So if you're not sure how to pronounce something, that's an easy fix, y'all. Look it up. Don't use a word until you are sure that you're doing it correctly. So a really good example of this, of not knowing what words means and how this can get you in trouble. When I was in Oklahoma City, I taught at Mid-America Christian University for 4 years. And as part of my class, every class that I taught, students either had to write a paper or do a presentation. And this was a big part of their grade. 40%. So this was a big chunk. And as you can imagine, I saw all levels of speeches and papers, some really good, some not so good. And one of my most outstanding memories was a young man who was talking about stress management, and he stumbled over several words. And I corrected his pronunciation a few times, things like chamomile. This is a tea that helps in relaxation. And then impotence, I almost didn't say it right, a possible side effect of too much stress. So I, as I said, corrected a couple of times, and he got to impotence. He struggled with that. I pronounced it correctly. He thanked me and then said, oh yeah, what does that mean anyway? Dead silence. Okay. The class had about 30 college students in them. About half of them were athletes. I could see that about half the group knew what it meant. They weren't going to touch it. The other half had no clue. So I debated for a few seconds and decided it would be more embarrassing for him if I didn't answer and made a big deal of it. So I just said, it's the inability to sustain an erection. And he said, oh, okay. And then it hit him. Oh, and his face turned so brick red. The class erupted in laughter. And yeah, it was very difficult to get things back on track. I shared the experience with some of the other teachers later, and one of them said, I bet that's the last time he uses a word in a presentation when he doesn't know what it means. I was like, yeah, one would hope. So Make sure you know what the words mean and you know how to pronounce them. Next, use proper animation in your voice, your facial expressions, and your body language when speaking to others. I have known some people who are really outgoing, gregarious, animated until they get in front of a group. And then they freeze and they become very wooden. They are lifeless. They speak in a monotone. They don't look at anybody because they're nervous. Well, the problem with that, one of the problems, is that in today's world, we're giving presentations all the time. It just happens a lot. It didn't used to as much. But if you cannot speak well in front of a group, you are handicapping yourself. So you need to learn how to do that. A lot of times, people aren't doing it well because of nervousness, stage fright, performance anxiety, which can be really debilitating. Many times when that happens, it's because people are so focused on themselves and how others perceive them and think of them that they get totally frozen. And a lot of times we're not as interesting to other people as we think we are. So here are some things to do for that. One is prepare, prepare, prepare. Did I say that enough times? If you have a good grasp on your topic and you know what you're going to say, boy, that goes a long way toward helping you feel calmer and more at ease. Another one, take some deep breaths. It is really hard to stay tense and nervous when you're breathing slowly and deeply. Another thing that can be helpful is to remove the focus from you. Unless you're headlining the show, most people aren't that centered on you anyway. So something that can be very helpful is to use PowerPoint or something similar and keep referring to that when you're talking so that people are looking at that and not staring at you. That takes some of the focus off. Now, when you're talking, you do need to look at your audience, but you don't have to just stay locked into eye contact with them. In fact, that's really not a good idea. A trick that can help is to look at their forehead or right at the top of their head. They will not be able to tell that you're not making eye contact with them. It will look like you are. The effect is the same. Another one is to imagine your entire audience naked. I did not come up with this, ladies. I found this years ago. It really does work. I would give credit if I remembered where it came from, but I don't. But it goes a long way toward helping the speaker feel more relaxed. Another thing to realize is that when you are speaking in front of a group, some degree of nervousness is normal, that it's just how it is. A lot of professional entertainers experience this on a regular basis, like every time they get up in front of a group. So use that nervousness to keep yourself sharp where you need to be. Something that can be helpful is to start out a presentation with some humor. And if you're not a good joke teller, and honestly, y'all, I am not the best at that, and you want to do that, find a funny, short, on-topic video that you can play at the start of your presentation. So you don't have to tell the joke. I tend to do this because honestly, I'm an okay joke teller. I'm not that great. When you do that, if you use a video, be sure that it is on topic, that it's not off color, that it is professional. Again, when I was doing the teaching, I would have, this happened a couple of times, kids who would use a video, a little video excerpt, and it was funny, but it wasn't on topic or it wasn't professional. So you want to be sure that all those things are happening. Otherwise, don't use it. Okay. Also, try to get yourself ready. So the day before your presentation, get some exercise, eat healthy. Don't just load up on junk food. Avoid too much caffeine. It's going to make you jittery. Maybe try to do some jumping jacks or go for a walk beforehand to help you settle down. Okay, now let's look at setting the stage. Setting the stage is a really important element in trying to have a good communication. So I'm going to give you, again, this is a compilation of different stories that I've heard over the years. Brenda, made up name, and I'm going to talk about what happened to her. So she had a presentation to make it work. She knows her topic pretty well. She's been looking it over, but she has some shyness. She's not real comfortable in front of a group, and she doesn't always manage her time well. So yesterday, the day before her presentation, she was trying to do too many things, as usual, guilty. And so she didn't start working on her report till late that night. Because of that, she slept poorly. She didn't have time to eat breakfast in the morning. She got to work with just minutes to spare. And she was really flustered by the time the meeting started. Because she was so rattled, she forgot the cardinal rule. Tell everyone, including yourself, to turn your cell phone off. Yep, her cell phone rang right shortly after she started her presentation. Then she can't find her cell phone because it's buried in her purse. I have had this happen. She manages to turn it off while stammering out an apology. After a few more minutes, she realizes she forgot to close the back door. So everybody in the conference room can hear this loud argument that's going on between the company receptionist and a delivery person in the foyer. After she closes the door, she discovers that the PowerPoint hookup isn't working. So she has none of the visuals that she spent most of yesterday preparing. At this point, her boss very impatiently suggests, let's reschedule this meeting. Well, Brenda is mortified and feels like a complete failure, right? Understandably. All of these things are very typical. Here are some ways to avoid them. The first thing is to set the stage for success by doing your prep work ahead of time. Don't wait until the day of or until the last minute. Now, if you're a person who speaks professionally all the time and you can wing it, that's fine. Most people are not like that. We need some prep time. So Brenda could have done a few things differently to really have been able to give an outstanding presentation. One is to manage her time better. Y'all, I don't know how many people I come across who do not put things in their calendar. I feel like that should be a rule for everybody. Put things in your calendar. And the second rule is check your calendar regularly. I am religious about putting things in my calendar. I have two Mac desktops, one at home, one at work. I have an iPad. I have two Apple phones, one for work, one for personal. And I love the calendar feature in it because it syncs between all of them. Okay, so I get things on my calendar. However, I will say occasionally I forget to check my calendar until like an hour before something like, oh my gosh, that's today? Yeah, so put things in your calendar and check your calendar regularly, and it will make things go much smoother. If you are doing a presentation, be sure to get there early enough that you can check out the physical space and the equipment before starting the meeting. If Brenda had done that, she would have been able to fix the whole PowerPoint hookup or get someone else there to fix it so that that would have gone smoothly. And then make up a checklist of things to do before the meeting. And here are some things that should be on everybody's checklist. Ask everybody, including yourself, to turn off cell phones. Check the thermostat. Make sure the room is a comfortable temperature. Set out snacks and drinks if it's that kind of a meeting that you need to do that. Maybe play some soft background music to block out outside noise or get a white noisemaker going. Make sure tables and chairs are set up properly. And if there's any reports that people need to be aware of, have those out, copies of them with paper, pen. In other words, just get everything ready so that there's no or not as many snafus. So this is really important to do in your business life, right? However, it is also important to do in your personal life if you are trying to have a conversation with one or two other people about something personal to you. The rule is, when you need to have a one-on-one discussion, focus on the discussion. So this means the rule is everything is turned off. TV, loud music, computer, cell phones, video games, tablets, all turned off. Otherwise, if your phone keeps beeping and you keep looking at, you are not paying attention at the person who is talking, or they're not paying attention to you. Honestly, one of my pet peeves is developed before cell phones. If you've ever been at a party and you're talking to somebody and you realize they're looking at people over your shoulder, they're paying no attention to what you're saying, drives me crazy. I will stop talking immediately and just walk off. They're not listening to me. So I'm done. Okay, so you're having a one-on-one discussion. Everything gets turned off. If you're a couple with young children, you may want to wait until the kids are in bed at night or out of the house or occupied, and understand that mom and dad are not to be interrupted because we're talking for a while. When our boys were little and Ed and I were trying to balance a checkbook or figure something out, we'd make sure they had a game, book, or a movie to engage them. Then I would tell them that if something happened and there was blood, they could come get us. Otherwise, they needed to leave us alone. I did the blood rule because initially I told them they could interrupt us if there was an emergency. However, I quickly learned that children and adults have different definitions of an emergency, so I changed that. Again, I counseled couples and families for years and years, And with a lot of them, I made two recommendations. One is that they have couple time, and two is that they have problem solving time. They're both exactly what they sound like. Couple time should happen 5 to 7 days a week. It is pretty casual. 15, 20 minutes sometime during the day. Evenings seem to work best. Pour some tea or wine, sit on the couch or the back deck and chat and catch up. This is not anything deep or profound. Okay. These are topics like, how did your boss like your presentation? Is your sister still coming to see us this weekend? Do we want to try and get tickets for the Miranda Lambert concert? How was lunch with your friends? What did Billy's coach say about his pitching? See, these are nothing deep, but these are just the little everyday things that we want to stay connected on. We want to be caught up on. And the only way to do that is to make time to actually discuss them and find out. Okay. Again, you don't need 2 hours a day. 15, 20 minutes should be plenty. I've known of couples with really hectic schedules, and they get this done by they schedule lunch together a couple of times a week, and they do it then. And if you can do that over lunch uninterrupted, you can actually carry on the conversation, and you'll put your phones aside, and that's fine. Figure out a way to make it work for you. Problem solving time is exactly what it sounds like. Normally, once a week is fine, unless there's an emergency or crisis of some type. And you said about 45 minutes to an hour. Honestly, y'all, don't go much over that because you won't want to do it again. Deal with as many issues as you can during that time frame, and the others are going to move to next week. So I suggest keeping a list somewhere and jotting things down as you think of them, and then cross them off as you do them. So problem-solving time also tends to address some annoying communication issues that a lot of couples face. Typically, one person is an avoider, and the other person is a confronter. The avoider feels trapped and uncomfortable during intense dialogue, so they try to run away from it. The confronter wants to discuss things and get them settled, so they're constantly running after the avoider. It is aggravating for both parties. So I would ask the confronter, would you feel better if you know that those issues are going to get discussed on a regular basis? And they would say yes. Then I would ask the avoider, would you feel better if your partner quits chasing you down and begging you to talk? And they also said yes. So I tell them both, schedule a regular time during the week, and this will help both of you. But a few warnings. The confronter needs to limit their requested discussions to the once a week scheduled time, unless an emergency happens. The avoider has to agree to sit down and talk things over. They can't keep skipping out on the meetings, or this is not going to work. So the time limit helps because the avoider knows that they're not going to be trapped in discussion hell forever. The confronter is comforted because they know that critical matters are going to be handled. Everybody wins. So really, if you have these types of issues with anybody, this is a really good way to do it. But again, it is critical that when you do this, all gadgets are turned off. Otherwise, you're not going to feel like people are paying attention to you, and that is really annoying. Okay. Another issue that happens that can throw communication off or make it difficult is the volume is not right. I've often thought it'd be so nice if we could turn the volume up or down for different things when people are talking. If you speak too loudly or too softly, you're probably aware of it because helpful people around you have usually pointed that out. But if you're not sure how audible you are, just ask somebody, or again, record yourself. If you speak really loudly, it can quickly become annoying to other people, so learn to turn the volume down. My dad, as he got older, he had developed dementia toward the end. He was still reasonably coherent, but there were some things that he wasn't. And as people get older, their controls loosen. So we found that when we would take Dad out to dinner or lunch somewhere, anything he thought, he would just say it. And he would say it loudly. I can't tell you how many times we'd be in a restaurant and he would say, do you see that woman over there, how big she is? And she's eating dessert. We'd be like, Dad. So yeah, you can see how that would be an issue. It was kind of funny, but not really. Some people are born with loud, penetrating voices, and everybody within half a mile can hear them. This also creates another issue. They don't get a lot of privacy because they think they're speaking softly and they are not. I may have shared this story, but when we were growing up, my dad was a preacher, and my brother Mike had one of those loud, penetrating voices. He still does. So he would be chatting with his friends during the church service. He thought he was doing it softly, but he was wrong, because several times I remember my dad in the pulpit stopping the sermon and saying, "Mike, you need to quit talking." And I have to say right now, full disclosure, I talked more than Mike did, but I knew how to whisper. Mike did not. He's figured it out since then, but back then he did not know how to do it. And I will say the loud voice thing can be really annoying. One of the things I really dislike is I've gone to a restaurant, I'm just eating lunch by myself, I'm enjoying it, I'm reading my book, and somebody the next table over is talking so loudly, and they have one of those loud voices. And I'm like, I don't want to hear all about your date last night. Not in excruciating detail. They just have one of those voices, and there's really not much you can do about it. If you need to lower the volume, if this is you, it's going to take some practice, and you're probably going to need to get some people to help you, to have them say, no, that's still too loud. That's better. Oh, there, right there. That's where you need to be. That can be helpful. Maybe if there are people you're around a lot, have them signal you, work out a signal so that you'll know when you're speaking too loudly. Now, I think the other end of the spectrum is more of an issue. Speaking too softly can lead to miscommunications and frustration. I know this because I've dealt with this for years, y'all. I have a soft speaking voice. I do not project. People don't hear me. If there is a lot of noise going on, I have trouble making myself heard. I'm very aware of the problem. I have been for years, and I really make an effort to speak up. Teaching for 4 years really helped me with this, because I would tell my students, if you can't hear me, wave or say, Dr. Rich, we can't hear you. And they would speak up. And so I would learn to speak louder. I've had clients over the years, counseling and hypnosis, who also speak so softly that I literally would have to turn off the background soft music that I'm playing and scoot my chair closer so I could hear them, because I couldn't hear what they were saying. So if you are in that position, here are some things that can be helpful. Be aware that you have that problem, and ask people to let you know if they can't hear you. They will. Just say, I know I speak softly. Let me know if I start fading out. Get physically closer to the person you are talking to if it's possible. Y'all, speaking across a big room is just a nightmare for me. I have to keep raising my voice, and it's hard. So I tend to, if I can, move my chair to get closer, shorten the distance, find some way of fixing it. If you are talking to a group, let them know that you don't project well. Ask them to be quiet so that you will be heard. And if you are addressing a large group, for goodness sakes, ask for a microphone. I love a good microphone. It is my friend when I am speaking. It sounds extreme, but honestly, I have been in really noisy situations where my voice is completely drowned out. And it's just like the pitch or something. I don't know what it is, but there are certain situations where I know people right next to me can't hear me. What I have done, if I'm with someone, is we start texting back and forth. It may look silly sitting next to each other and texting, but at least, we can hear each other or see what the other person is saying. Sometimes if you breathe deeply and you think about sending your voice to the back of the room, that can help. So a lot of times getting the volume adjusted is just a matter of awareness and practice, and that really does help improve the communications. When you see that people stop wincing when you talk because you're talking so loudly, or they quit saying, what was that? Because they can't hear you, it makes conversations a lot more enjoyable. So if you fall into this category, put a little effort into it. I promise it will help. Okay. Another thing that can really derail communication, I've known people like this, I'm sure you have too, people who use a lot of jargon. Okay. A definition of jargon that I found is an outlandish technical language of a particular profession, group, or trade. Another meaning is unintelligible writing or talk. Basically, jargon is fine if it's doctors and nurses speaking in a hospital, because they all understand that shorthand that they use. They get it. But if it's a doctor or nurse outside of that setting, and the other people are not in the medical profession, they are not going to understand what you're talking about. So let me give you some examples of common used terminology in different professions to show what I mean. So medical terminology. I don't know if I'm saying this right, pronouncing it right. Agonal, agonal. It signifies a major negative change in a person's condition. They're deteriorating. BP, that's medical shorthand for blood pressure. I got that one. FX, that means a bone fracture. JT means a joint. So you can see there's just different ones. But a lot of times people they're used to using that shorthand in their work setting. And when they try to do outside of the work setting, no one knows what they're talking about. Psychological psychobabble. Yes, my field has it too. Congruence means agreement. Submodalities, building blocks of experience. Synergy. This is basically the interaction or cooperation of two or more organizations, substances, or people that produces a combined effect that's greater than the sum of their separate parts. So those are things that can happen. Now, here's one. I am saying this word for word that I found, and you all can guess what profession this comes from. References in these regulations to a regulation are references to a regulation in these regulations, and references to a schedule are references to a schedule in these regulations. Didn't make that up. Guess what that is? That is for a code for something. I think it may have been the legal profession. Yeah, it was legal. If you say too much of that, of your technical professional jargon, you are going to make it really hard for people to understand you. Some of them will tell you that, others will not. You just won't know. Okay, a couple of more things. One is grammar. Y'all, one of the quickest ways to sound uninformed, unprofessional, or illiterate is to speak and or write incorrectly. You should always use correct grammar if you are speaking or writing. I'm going to try not to dwell on this too much because I will confess it is one of my pet peeves, but I want to talk about it a little bit because so many people do it. When I started teaching at Mid-America Christian University, I first had everybody just do a paper, and I was appalled at the quality of some of the papers. The report, and I was dealing with upperclassmen, juniors and seniors. So the reports were filled with misspelled words, typos, run-on sentences, misused words, grammatical errors, poor syntax, colloquialisms. And I knew, okay, I'm a PhD, I'm teaching, these are college students. But what I kept thinking was, these kids are going to be looking for jobs in a couple of years. Who's going to hire them if they sound like second or third graders? And y'all, I know this is an issue because I have spoken to executives in HR departments for different organizations, and that's one of their big complaints. Job applicants don't sound or look professional. They just don't. And people don't want to hire them. So even though it may have been a few years since you were last in school, that is no excuse for not using proper grammar. It just needs some practice. It needs some thought. So there are some things that people do that when they were writing, one of the things that my students would do is they would confuse there a lot. THERE, like over there, THEIR. It's their turn to do whatever. And then also even THEYRE, they're going to go. They would just get those confused, especially in writing, sometimes even in saying them. Don't be lazy. Use your words correctly. One of my biggest all-time things that drives me crazy is saying people that instead of people who. So an incorrect would be, I saw the guy that held up the liquor store. Correct way would be, I saw the guy who held up the liquor store. My sons laugh at me because I'm correcting the people on the TV. That people do this all the time. I'll say, no, it's people who, it's not people that. I know, one of my pet peeves. Another one is inconsistencies in verb tenses, going back and forth between past, present, future. So it's confusing. So an incorrect one. At the dance, Sarah drank a lot of punch, then feels sick because the punch is spiked. Okay. There was a past tense and two present tense. Correct would be, at the dance, Sarah drank a lot of punch, then felt sick because the punch was spiked, all in the past tense. Okay. Be aware. So there's a lot of incorrect usage of then, THEN, and than, THAN. It's IT apostrophe S and it's ITS. Me, myself, and I. People are not sure which one to use in which context. Lay down or lie down. So written mistakes are really, really obvious when somebody else reads them, and they can make you look really uneducated. Here's how to avoid that. If you're writing something, read over your work when you're done and read it out loud. I guarantee you, you will catch a lot more mistakes when you read it out loud than when you just look at it. Next, use spell check when you finish writing. It will catch about half of your mistakes. It's not all of them, but it will catch more than you probably would have done on your own. Be aware that it's almost impossible to catch all of your own mistakes. I never do. So if you can, have someone else read it over and give you some feedback. And if it's possible, if you're writing something, get it written a day or two before, let it sit there, and then come back to it after a day. And you'll be amazed at how many mistakes jump out at you that you just didn't see the first time. It happens. If you do a lot of public speaking, you know that at times you are going to make a mistake. You're just going to. It's unavoidable. Try not to stress out too much. If you become aware that you goofed, and hopefully you do, apologize, correct yourself, move on. Make a joke about it if it's appropriate. And just remember that happens to everybody. Don't beat yourself up over it. However, if you do want to use grammar and syntax when speaking so that you don't sound like the Beverly Hillbillies, and no offense, I love that show, here are a few good ways to avoid those types of mistakes. Practice, practice, practice. I highly recommend joining Toastmasters. You will get a chance to speak in front of people and get feedback about what you said, and that can be helpful. Record yourself, y'all. Again, everybody has cell phones nowadays. Record what you're going to say, watch it back. Notice how you sound and how you come across. That can be very helpful. Ask other people for help. Discreetly. You don't want them yelling at you in the middle of a meeting. Hey, you didn't say that right. And don't ignore comments that people make just because you don't like them. They still could be true, even if you didn't want to hear them. And a really good way to improve your reading and your writing and your speaking skills, well, I said that wrong. Your writing and your speaking skills is to become a big reader. That is so helpful. I've done it all my life, and I highly recommend it. Okay, a couple more things I want to cover. Another way that people can look really silly when they're speaking, and it messes up communication, is to not know what you're talking about. This is very obvious to other people, and it is also easy to avoid. Just get information carefully before jumping into a conversation that you may regret. Do your homework. You've probably had the experience I have of being in a small group of people. You're talking, somebody else strolls up, joins the meeting, and they just jump in and start talking, and it's obvious they have no clue what they're talking about. They look like an idiot. And you kind of feel sorry for them. Don't be that person. So if you are going someplace, be prepared. If you know you're going to a party with a lot of people from a particular company or a church or whatever, research it. Find out, what are some things they do? Where are they located? What do they specialize in? Here's a big one. If you don't know something, be quiet. It is much easier to do that than to say something thinking that you're going to look really smart and you end up looking not smart. Listen to other people for a while before you jump in. That really is a lot better. It gives you a feel for what's going on. You're going to sound like you really are a smart person rather than the open mouth insert foot thing. If you think something is true, it's fine to share it. Just make sure that you give a disclaimer. I read somewhere that global warming isn't as big a deal as experts were saying a few years ago. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it sounds intriguing. You give yourself an out. So if someone says, oh, that's not true, then you say, well, I wasn't really sure if it was. And unless this kind of follows that last one, unless you're 100% sure about something, resist the temptation to be adamant in your opinions, because you could still be wrong. How many times have you heard people say, I know, I am positive, I am sure, and then find out they were still wrong? So it's always best to give yourself a little wiggle room. If you say something like, I'm pretty sure Mr. Thompson is retiring at the end of August, but I could have misheard. That's a lot better than, I know for a fact that Mr. Thompson is retiring at the end of August, and then finding out it's actually November. Even if it was originally August and he changed his mind, you still come across looking uninformed and kind of silly. Okay, so I am going to stop here with this one. We will take it up again next time. But those are some things that honestly, y'all, will help with communication. And communication can make things smooth and easy, or it can really mess things up. Okay, so let's go. Oh, and this will be, parts of this will be in the Facebook Taking Care of Your Temple group. So you can have some of that. Okay. So a fun fact about Waco. Waco has something called Church Under the Bridge that was started by an organization that's now called Mission Waco back in 1992. And Church Under the Bridge literally meets under I-35 and 4th Street Bridge, Sundays at 10:30. And it's churchunderthebridge.org if you're interested in this. It started back in 1992. A couple and then a college student met up this homeless man and started talking to him, and they kind of started a Bible study, and more people came, and it just kind of grew very organically. Now they literally have people from all walks of life that go to this every Sunday, literally under a freeway bridge. I just think that's so cool, meeting people where they are. So it's a great organization. Mission Waco is amazing. They do a lot of great work in Waco. So if you're interested, www.churchunderthebridge.org, and you can find out more about it. And if you're ever in Waco, they would love to have you visit. Okay, so along with this podcast and Waco Hypnosis Center, I am available for public speaking. If you're interested in having me for an event, you can contact me through my website at www.drmelissarich.com, or you can email me at info@drmelissarich.com. Ladies, if y'all enjoyed this podcast, and I'm sure that you did because there were so many good things in there, I would love for you to do one or more of the following. Write me a good review. Share the episode. Follow the podcast. That would be so helpful. I am working on building up my audience, and I will take all the help that I can get in doing that. I am so glad that you all joined me today. I hope that you guys have a good week and that we will see each other back here again next week. Thanks, ladies. Bye.